Hi, welcome to JoTel, the journey of the examined life. My name is Rahul. Angel's life story was the first video we recorded. When I heard about Angel's story, I wondered how someone who had been through so much could even hope to heal. Angel, as you will discover, faced her pain through years of internal work. Historically, sexual abuse survivors have been silenced. Angel was no different in that regard. So I was mindful to let Angel tell her story in her own words, without too many questions from me. I went through many emotions listening to this story, initially shock and bewilderment. By the end, I felt outraged for Angel. Just a few things to note. Her story has many triggering parts, so please read the trigger warning coming up. We have changed names and removed sections due to identifying details. And I hope that you get a lot of insight and inspiration from Angel's recovery story. Content warning. This video contains discussion about difficult subjects from the outset. Abuse, abandonment, child sexual abuse, drug use, narcissism, mental illness, PTSD, suicidal ideation, violence.
My name's Angeline. I'm from San Diego, and today we're going to be talking about sexual trauma and sexual abuse in the family and fallout from that. So for my story, I was sexually abused from the ages of 2 to 7 by my uncle on my father's side of the family. And obviously affected me a lot. And I think in order to understand, my side of the stories, because, you hear people, get sexually abused, and then usually later on they work through it. For my case, I didn't tell people about my story. I didn't tell my parents until I was 15. And the only reason why I said anything in the first place was because I was scared for my cousin at the time, who I found out my uncle was living with her family, and she was barely like 12 or 13. And at 15, I was raised in a military family in San Diego. So I think 15 is usually around the age you start you stop thinking about me, and you start realizing about other people and what they probably might be going through. And I just had the sudden urge to tell my father what happened to me. But what ended up happening was, for the short term, or trying to make it what ended up happening was I ended up telling my family. And because I ended up doing that, he, of course, had to tell his parents, which are my grandparents. And because I come from a giant Hispanic family, everybody else had to be notified. Or my father just ended up calling up all his aunts, uncles, and cousins. And to keep it short, they believed me because my grandmother knew the entire time. But since she was the matriarch or the head of the family, she ended up telling me that that I should forgive him and stay silent, and told my cousins the same way as well. And then over time, the story started changing to, oh, you should forgive him, to you should stay silent, to you're lying. And at 15, that was a lot to take in, realizing that my family, the family that, that helped me grow up over there and that lives in a different state, suddenly just cut me off at that one point. My aunt, the cousin, my cousin's mother, my aunt, she ended up just straight up telling me that she couldn't believe me because her brother was living with her at the time, and called me a liar and said I needed to get help at 15, and then told me to stay away from her daughter and stop talking to her because I was scaring her daughter. And a lot of stuff ended up happening in all that. But basically, my father ended up becoming exceptionally upset that his family is having this reaction. So he cut them off and disowned everybody from that side of the family. then came to me and told me he gave me my own choice to cut them off or not. But he basically had to sit me down and tell me that they're an old school family. Unfortunately, this is more common than he would like to admit, and that for the safety of his immediate family and myself, that he asked me not to talk to them anymore. But being 15, I tried talking to them, but I just kept getting shut out. And over time, I was just became known as the pariah, basically. Don't talk to Angel. She's going to get into drugs and become a prostitute. Don't talk to Angel. She's a bad person. She's a liar. Something's wrong with her. And I just kind of had to live with that. And for the longest time at 15, I had the option to go to therapy, which I kind of did for like a year, but then I stopped because I was not a dumb teenager. I was a teenager, still going through it a lot. I was trying to get into college. I just stopped. And it wasn't until the age of 19 that I started full blown therapy again, because by that time I was trying to get into relationships, and I couldn't connect to other people intimately at all. Like I'd start crying anytime someone would try touching me or even like giving me a kiss or anything. But I went through that, and then 10 years later, which was for me, it was like 4 years ago, I ended up going back out and contacting my cousin again, my cousin who that I thought I was trying to help. Because the only reason why I was trying to help her in the first place is because there's been 3 instances in our childhood that she tried telling me that our uncle was doing the same things that he was doing to me. And a little warning. Well, I'm going to go a little in depth of what he was doing. For him, my uncle was kind of smart because at the time when I was like around the ages of 2 or 3, what he would do was that he'd show me his genitals, and then he'd make me do stuff to him, but he wouldn't touch me at all. And he made a huge show that he wasn't touching me, but he'd coach me through what he wanted me to do to him. And unfortunately, when I was like around 5 or 6, and my cousin was barely around, I'm probably mixing up the ages now I think about it, because I think she's like 5 or 6 years between us. But when she was like around a toddler, I ended up catching him do the same thing that he did to me to her. And I didn't know what to do. So I kind of just like closed the door and left her with my uncle. And a second time that she tried telling me, she was around 8. And I think I was around 13 at that time. She tried asking me, hey, has uncle ever done anything to you? And then she tried describing it, and I shut her down. And it's like, we don't talk about that at 8 years old. I shut her down, and it's probably one of my biggest regrets, because I at the time, he was threatening me that if I told someone that people would stop loving me. And I didn't want, my grandparents to stop loving me. So I told my cousin, I'm like, when she was telling me, and I'm like, we don't talk about that. And I basically shamed her, and she just stayed silent. And then the third time she tried reaching out to me one last time. It was finally the time I actually tried to do something. That was when I was around 15. And I think she was like barely 13 or something. And she basically told me that what he was doing to her. And then, but not only my uncle, but there was another cousin of her side who was older, was also doing stuff to her as well. And I remember the conversation. She was crying and I was crying, and I was telling her I'm so sorry. And that she told me she didn't know what to do. She already went to her mom to it. And the only thing her mom told her was that sexually abused in large families happen, and that it's normal, and to just move on, because they don't want anybody to get in trouble, and to forgive them. That's basically what my aunt told her. And, at 15, I'm like, holy shit, that's not cool. So I ended up telling my dad, and that's when everything kind of broke out. Anyways, I ended up contacting her around the time she turned like 19 or 20. And by that time, I already knew she was like in college, and that I kind of assumed like, oh, she's an adult now, so maybe hopefully, her mom won't come at me for trying to talk to her. I went up to her Facebook, her Instagram. Not gonna lie, I was like kind of stalking. It was a little creepy because I didn't have her number or anything anymore. And I made the mistake of starting the conversation of trying to apologize to the times I didn't believe or I didn't do anything back then. And then also apologizing for our parents, my father and her mother always fighting. Like, it was like such an awkward conversation starter. I think at that point I was still kind of like messed up over my family turning their backs on me, and then my family turning their backs on her. So in my mind, we're like two similar people that was just getting fucked over by our family. So I still had the mentality that I need to save her. I need to save her. I need to be the person that comes and saves her. And so I came into her with a savior's mentality, which was not the right thing to do to someone like that, because she ended up writing me a huge, long essay, basically, of telling me that all the stuff I said had happened never happened, that our uncle never did anything to her, and that I'm a liar, and that she used to love me, and that I broke her heart, and I'm the reason why we broke up the family. I'm the reason why everything's I could see all the hurt and pain that she went through, and she just pretty much blamed me for everything. And basically telling me that I'm the reason why she had to live the life she had to live, that I'm a liar, that she it was pretty heartbreaking. That day I felt like I died because what I imagined who she was and who she was in that moment, it did not compute. It felt like my brain short-circuited. And I couldn't get mad at her for like blaming me or accusing me of lying and of calling me disgusting and that I needed help. Because to be honest, at that time, 4 years ago, I believed her. She was so convincing. I'm like, oh my God, I'm this horrible person. And the only thing I could tell her right back was, I'm sorry. And unfortunately, she took that as admission that I did lie and that I did do all these things. And I'm the reason. And she told me, I'm disowning you. You're no longer my family. I don't love you. Don't ever talk to me or my family ever again. And I'm like, okay. So that's when I stopped contacting her. And I'm like, well, this is not the imaginary fairy tale reunion that I thought we would have. So that was like my second or third time in life where I'm like, time to go right back to therapy. And like that day, I ended up calling 4 different therapists and then getting a hold of my doctor. And I was like begging them to give me brain scans because I had it in my mind that I was a liar and that I was crazy and that maybe I did make all this up between the ages of, 2 to 7. And then maybe I did do all this to break up the family for whatever reason. And when I ended up going to my therapist and telling him what was happening, he basically looked at me and he's like, Miss, you're traumatized. You don't need brain scans. I can tell that you're telling the truth. And he's like, even looked at my records because at that time I already had 10 years worth of therapy. And he's like, you're just exhibiting symptoms of PTSD and trauma. I'm like, all right. And so ever since then, these past 4 years, just been working through that. And it took some time to mourn my imaginary relationship with my cousin that I thought I was going to have. And to finally realize that the relationships I wanted with my extended family over in that other state was never going to be a possibility. And I basically had to come to terms that the people that I grew up with and that I had on my mind as a child, because I still had them up on a pedestal and I still wanted their love, were not the healthiest kind of people to have in my life, basically. Because I wanted them to love me so bad and to understand that I was telling the truth so bad that I completely forego the obvious manipulation, gaslighting, and abuse that was happening within that entire family. And I came to terms this year. This year it took like 4 years of coming to terms and doing all kinds of therapy and psychedelics and a lot of talking to other people who are in similar situations that I was in, that I had to finally let them go and block them all on my social media, get rid of their numbers, and just finally mourn them like they were dead. And ever since I did that, it's like a giant weight's been lifted off my shoulders. So the expectations that I made myself for them was finally gone. And now I feel like I'm finally living my life. Man, there's like so much I'm like leaving out. Should I talk about any kind of like background information from the family?
Anything you want. I think what just like, it's so powerful what you shared. Like, there was so much. I found myself like having to hold on to my desk with rage. I was really outraged, and I just felt really outraged for you the whole time you were talking, because the things that happen and that system that allows it to happen, that, repressive, socially conservative, we don't talk about family, we don't talk about sex, abuses because the victim should be ashamed, not the perpetrator, all those horrible things. I could really feel that pain. And so many other people that I've talked to who shares child sexual abuse, they have all that stuff, all those horrible beliefs, all those beliefs that were instilled on it. I really heard that from you. It's really powerful.
Yeah. I know with like my extended family, like how I talk to them or talk about them, people hear my stories, they think like, oh, these are terrible, horrific people, monsters. But unfortunately, I don't think there's no such thing as a bad person. I think people do bad things because of the pain they feel or the trauma they felt in the past. But they just have a choice to do those bad things or not. And sometimes people choose to do those bad things, but it necessarily doesn't turn them into a monster or a bad person. And if you see my extended family over there in the other state, outside perspective, they look like a happy, well-adjusted family with a lot of love, a lot of kindness. My grandmother, when I talk to people and explain how my grandmother is, I try to explain to her like she's a rose full of thorns covered in honey. She's very sweet. She's like, you can feel love emanating from her, but there's always an undertone of criticism, and she's thinking behind the scenes. Because since she's a matriarch, she has to deal with all the drama that's happening within her own family. And she has to control everyone, keep everyone in line to what she thinks is what is a family. And I think to better understand like why my grandmother thinks this way and why my aunt thinks this way is probably have a better understanding of their history. So obviously they're all, I come from a Latin family on that side of the family. My father's Hispanic, my mother's white. But my father grew up in an environment near Mexico. So we'll just say they live in Texas, near Mexico, and in an area filled with crime, basically. So he basically grew up in an environment where of a father who just came home from Vietnam and abused his wife and had PTSD. And like my father would wake up in the room with his own father choking him because he was going through a war episode. And to my dad, that was normal growing up because you don't know what you don't know. And you're like, just my dad doing weird stuff. And my grandmother had to live with that. And with my grandmother, it wasn't her first marriage, it was her second marriage, because her first marriage, she ended up having a child with a man, but he ended up just beating her horrifically. And then she ended up leaving him and then found my grandfather. And my grandfather, it was also his second marriage. So he actually had a family with 2 other kids And then he ended up leaving them, and then they ended up getting together and getting married and then having 2 kids. And so my first aunt, she ended up passing away due to some kind of childhood sickness. And then my grandmother had my older aunt, who is the mother of my cousin, and also my father. And I say 2 children. My grandmother's side of the family was also into drugs, so they're drug runners. And they basically did human trafficking. So it was like her business where she'd sell kids. And it was just normalized. It was like just a thing that they did. And my father basically grew up like, you know, he like as a kid, he'd like play outside and then come inside. And then he had his family members doing lines of coke and, you know, gangbangers. And my father, he, you know, didn't have the best childhood. My parents met in high school at the age of 15. And then they had me when they were 17. So yeah, like not the best environment in teenage pregnancy, but fortunately, he actually loved my mother, and so got married the same year he was pregnant with me, and then like really wanted me, and he ended it. And then at 18, he joined the military, which thank God he did, or we would have been stuck in that town. And then as soon as he got the job and his new orders in the military, he picked up our cute little family and just moved us as far away from his family as possible. Because even he told me that even though he was in the throes of the manipulation from his grandparents, and like he knew something was wrong, and he just wanted to get as far away as possible from his family. Because he told me he just felt, he didn't know the specific words at the time, but he knew something was wrong, and he's like, I can't raise a daughter in this environment.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, we'd visit sporadically, and those visits sporadically, it was when unfortunately I was getting sexually abused without them realizing it. Yeah, so we like all this together, and then you got like my grandmother's and my grandparents' hot mess of a soup of them just damage controlling everything in their lives because of their bad decisions. And around the time I started whistleblowing in the family, basically about my sexual abuse, was around the time my half sister ended up introducing herself, because at the time I didn't know she existed until I was 15. And that was wild in itself, because the conversations we were having, I was a naive 15-year-old. But unfortunately, over there in the Hispanic family, when you're 15, you're considered an adult. And I think that's their way of trying to convince themselves all these children between the ages of 13 and up having kids just means they're adults now. And my uncle, I remember specifically, we had one visit and he like just stopped touching me whatsoever. And vice versa, was when I found out that he ended up having a girlfriend at the time. And that was around the time when I was like 13, and they ended up visiting our family. And at that time, he was around 20, 21, and he ended up knocking up a 14-year-old girl. And when she turned 15, they got permission from her parents to marry my uncle. And so around 15, 16, that's when they got married and had a couple of kids. Now I hear they're divorced because she aged out, basically. But in their eyes, they don't see the ages 14, 15, 16 as a child like, normal people in the States would. I know in other countries, 16 is usually the age of consent, but here in the States, it's not like that. So that's why at 15, when I spoke out, they considered me as an adult, and then they tried sitting down with me as an adult and telling me I needed to, shut up. Yeah. And then even to this day, when I've like talked, I actually like started talking to my grandmother 4 years ago to try to like have some kind of closure. She basically told me that I was 15. I should have known better. Like, you should have known the fallout of all the political, social gatherings. Like I would know their past and how to stay silent for some reason. And let's say where I think I lost my train of thought. But basically, my the entire family has a lot of skeletons. Basically, their premise of what is an adult and what isn't an adult, and when my half sister ended up introducing herself, it was only because at 15 she ran away from her family because her grandfather, the mother of her father that was raping her, was also sexually abusing her, and apparently her stepfather is also touching her inappropriately too. So she ran away, got into a bunch of drugs, got pregnant, and then she also, as soon as she turned 17, got married to the man she got pregnant with, and then she also joined the military. And she, at the time, I thought we were establishing a relationship because, again, 15 naive Angel was like, oh, new sister, like, hopefully she can be on my side with this all going on. And at first she was. And then I was also like, I had drama with my father because I'm like, why'd you keep this a secret? And then around 15, 16 is when he started just telling me all the family secrets, everything, and trying to explain to me why he did the things he did. And like, it didn't help because I found out from my grandmother that my grandmother, she has like this fantasy idea that everyone's going to just forget about all the hurts that everyone did together, and they're going to forgive each other, and we're all going to be one giant big happy family. We'll just shut up about everything that's ever happened to us. And she helped, raise my half sister, and she kept telling my half sister that, oh, your father loves you. Your father wants you. One day he's going to, love you and accept you. Just feeding her lies. And so my half sister had the idea and the dream that she was going to reunite with my father. My father was going to take her in and show her all the love and want of a father. Within that family environment, girls are expected to become women at extremely early ages. And their idea of what sexual abuse is, it doesn't match up to what the modern usage of what sexual abuse is. So like when I finally started reaching out and talking to my grandmother, she was exceptionally receptive. To her, she thought of like, oh, Angel's coming back. She's going to apologize. We're going to bring the happy family together. In my mind, I hated her for the longest time because I knew she'd say I love you and tell me she'd believe me at one point, and then she'd turn her back and then tell the family that I'm lying and I'm crazy. And it got to the point where I started recording our phone calls together, because I thought I was going insane because I didn't realize the amount of gaslighting that she was doing to me and to the other people in her family. And the one specific phone call that I had with her was that my validation, what I wanted was her to accept that I was sexually abused by her son, and that I just wanted her to apologize. And I remember we had a long drawn out conversation, and to be honest, I wasn't the best person. I was bitchy to her. I was disrespectful to her, and as someone who feels guilty and ashamed, she took it all. I called her names and everything. I basically just like let out all my anger toward her, and she took it. That old woman took it, and like at the time, I felt like I wanted to say she deserved it, but now that I look back, to me, I just felt I was just being cruel for no reason. It's one of the things I actually regret doing, was lashing out in such a way. But I got to the point where I straight out, flat out told her in excruciating detail what that man did to me. And the only thing I heard in another phone line was her softly sobbing. And when I was done, and I was just crying myself, and I told her, and I was like, I wanted her response. And my grandmother, she basically went back and forth going, Mia, I'm so sorry. Mia, I'm so sorry he did that to you. And then she went back and forth to, maybe he was on drugs, Mija, maybe he was on drugs. I'm so sorry. She's like, I wish I could. I wish I could take all your hurt. I wish I could take all your hurt from you and heal you from this. I'm so sorry. I wish I could make everything better, but I know I can't. And she would just ramble on like that over and over again. And I just stay silent. And I'm like, it's okay, Grandma. It's okay, Grandma. And that was the start of many phone conversations we would have. And during this time, my aunt found out that my grandmother was talking to me. And my grandmother would tell me that, oh, your tia, she told me I shouldn't be talking to you. She says I should leave you alone and never talk to you again. But then she'd tell me that, and then she'd be like, but you're my granddaughter. I love you. She can't tell me what to do. And that's the beginning when I started realizing that that was her way of like going, my tia's doing this, but I'm on your side, when really she wasn't on my side. And over time, that's with the phone conversations, recordings I had, I started, discrepancies in it. And like when I talked to my cousin, in my mind, I thought I was telling my grandmother the truth, and she was like telling the family what was happening. In reality, my grandmother was feeding me what I wanted to hear, but she went back to the family and telling my tia, like, uncle, sexual abuse uncle never touched her. She was lying, but then would bring it back of, Angel was only 15. She was just a child. She didn't know what she was doing. You need to forgive her. And when my cousin talked to me, she basically told, I told my cousin, like, I told grandma all of this, and grandma knows that this happened and that this happened to you, and that, like, we should have a discussion about this. And then my cousin retorted back, like, I just called grandma and she says you're fucking lying. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, that never happened. And then, like, same with us talking with my half sister. Like, I'd tell my half sister what the things that my cousin would tell me, and my half sister would come back and say, cousin says you're fucking lying. She said she never said anything like that. And then the one thing that always pissed me off was both my half sister and my cousin, especially my half sister, because at this point, we're no longer in a relationship of any kind anymore. Was that she basically told me straight out that uncle would never harm our cousin, that if it ever happened to our cousin, she would beat him up, that she's strong, that she would say something, that and I remember talking to my half sister. I'm like, well, this happened to us when we were like toddlers and kids. Like, what would you expect a toddler and kid to do? Yeah. Scream and shout and cry? I'm like, if you did that, you get smacked. This man's obviously huge. I couldn't comprehend why it was, and that pissed me off, because I'm like, you're telling me that I took it as I deserved what happened to me because I didn't speak out, or I didn't scream and cry and beat him up. And that was the constant theme throughout the entire time I was arguing with both my cousin and my half sister, because to them, they became extremely close because of all this happening. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's like, even now I'm extremely angry. It's the one thing I'm extremely angry about, because being told, I don't believe you. And then also being told, like, uncle would never do this. I love him so much. He's such a good person. He's not like this. Like, you don't understand, even though uncle has a past of him grooming and sleeping with other children and getting them pregnant. And then not only that, but the dude is like, he looks like he's from the cartel. So he has like a shaven head with tattoos all over his body. He's been in and out of prison for almost killing somebody multiple times. And he's been a known drug addict. So it's, again, like right now I'm kind of like painting a huge horrific picture of him, but I'm pretty sure on the outside, people see him as a recovered addict who, just takes care of the giant family and all his kids, and who helps out his aging parents. That's the view other people see of him. The view I see of him is like, taking all that fluff away, and I see what's like truly inside.
What's behind the curtain?
Oh yeah, exceptionally behind the curtain. And it's just pretty interesting to know, because for me, in order to get through this, not only the trauma, the sexual abuse, but the trauma of my family acting the way we were, because I couldn't, longest time I couldn't, I'm like, why are they acting like this? Like, why can't they see that we all have a problem? We all need to go to therapy, and that we all need to work through this. But unfortunately, when something like sexual abuse and conservatism, because they're Catholic, Roman Catholics, and they just grow up in such a huge, tight-knit family that this type of thinking, this way of thinking of forgive, forget, and what is sexual abuse, what isn't, how old an adult is, and who isn't an adult. It's just so ingrained that they can't think of any way else. How else to live. And especially with my cousin, she the hardest part was to know that she I basically had to emphasize with her, because I'm not angry at her at all, and I'm a little bit sad, but I'm not angry. She lived a life where I was all the way in San Diego, so I didn't have constant access to my uncle. Unfortunately, she lived in Texas, and eventually he ended up moving in with that family. So he had constant access to her and her younger sister. So if I was in her shoes and this was happening to me, and then one day it stops because she also aged out his preferences too, but now she has a younger sister. And then you finally try telling the truth because your older cousin told the truth. And then suddenly your mom comes to you and tells you, this is normal. And then slowly but surely, I'm pretty sure her mom's like, what if this didn't happen to you? Like this didn't happen to you at all. And if I was in that, in that spot, and like if my own parents told me something like that too, and I didn't know any better, I'd probably believe them. It's like earlier in our conversation when we talked about, was it the sky is green? Was that what you had? It's the same thing. If you have someone older than you when you're younger telling you the sky is green, you end up looking up and then looking at them like, we'll look at them again. We're like, okay, yeah, the sky is green. The sky is green, and then believing it. So with my cousin,
it's not true. Somewhere,
yeah, it's not. It's not. Deep down, it's true.
Yeah.
But in order to live your life in somewhat of a normal fashion, to bury the deep hurt and the invalidation that comes with it, you have to go on with it. And I believe my cousin, she basically had to invent an entire reality for herself. And had to use me as the scapegoat, or to put all her pain in, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, and like even for myself, I the toughest thing for me to get through was that I still felt like I was responsible in saving her and responsible of her pain. And it took me the longest time to realize that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my responsibility to help or save her. The people that failed us were our caretakers, her mother. And I can't even imagine having a mother who looks you in the face and says, this never happened, and your cousin's lying. I can't imagine living a life that much stress where your abuser lives with you, that got to the point where she just had to forget it and bury it deep. And like the conversation I had with her 4 years ago was pretty interesting because she was exceptionally angry. She was blaming for a lot of things, but like in her tone, like you can tell that like for a split millisecond, she like didn't believe herself and then suddenly like believed herself all over again. It was very bizarre, but I think it's just another coping mechanism that people have to endure or deal with in order to endure with the abuses they have in their life. And I don't blame her. At this point with that entire family, I still love them. And it's surprising too, because I still love my uncle as well, the one who abused me. And I've already gotten to the point where I've already forgiven all of them. I've forgiven my abuser a long time ago, like when I was like 18, 19. But the hardest one was forgiving my aunt and my grandmother, which I've already forgiven. And just realizing and just hoping that even though I'm no longer in their lives, and knowing that I shouldn't be in their lives, because it would be bad mentally for me, and I wouldn't want to start a family and bring them into that mess as well, you know. I've gotten to the point where I hope finds help, but if she doesn't, that's okay too. I hope whatever reality she lives in, it's a happy one, and I hope whatever way she decides to deal with it, that hopefully it doesn't happen to her own kids. And I just hope that, you know, she and the rest of my family over there live happy lives, even though that's my hope, even though I know that's not the reality, because I know growing up with my sexual abuse, because I grew up Catholic as well, I, like, at the age of 4 or 5, I thought it was broken, I was disgusting, and I also thought I was going to go to hell, because I went to Sunday school and they told us, like, you know, have sex or like anything dealing with that kind of stuff, you're going to go to hell. So at the age of like 6 to 7, I was like already suicidal, because I was like so messed up that I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna go to hell. I'm disgusting. No one wants me. And that was around the time where, because of my sexual abuse, I didn't have boyfriends. I couldn't like date like you're normally supposed to do in like middle school and high school. So for me, because when you're younger, it's you don't know it's wrong, and like when you grow up in a religious environment, they don't teach you sex ed. They don't teach you the no spots. I wasn't taught the no spots. My mom tried to teach me where babies come from, but I still had the notion that angels took the babies in your tummy and then they take them out of your tummy. Like, that was my understanding of how like sex worked. I didn't know there's like moving parts or anything. So when I was younger and like he first showed me, I was scared at first, but he made it fun in terms of like a game. And like, he never touched me, so I didn't understand what was happening, but all I knew was that he was happy. He was happy, but it was also a game of secrecy, because he's like, don't tell anyone. But he would smile when he'd tell me that. He's like, don't tell anyone, okay? But as I got older and I started questioning him, I'm like, when I was, as a child would, that's when he'd start threatening me, like, if anybody knows this is happening, no one's gonna love you. And yeah, and like growing up, yes, I had the thought that I didn't think it was actually sexual abuse when I found out what sexual abuse was, because he made me do it in a way that felt like I was the one who wanted to do it, and I was the one who was doing it. So I felt like I abused him growing up. I felt like I was the one that hurt him, and then I was
journey to come back to the other side.
Yeah, until realizing like, no, he was the one that was messed up. And yeah, growing up with that was hard. And I was like, I went through my phases as a kid. I had what was called there's like an actual word for it. It's my therapist basically told me, when you have such a traumatic like childhood, that you end up forgetting years of your childhood. And so when I was like 18, 19, like from the ages of 2 to like 9, it was like blank. I was like only remember like a couple memories here and there, but even my parents were a little concerned when we would talk about my childhood. I'd be like, that happened? I'm like, I don't remember that. And it wasn't until around that time in high school, like sophomore, junior, and senior years, around the time I dated. But I couldn't date men. And so at that time, I took that as, oh, I must be a lesbian. And like, it was weird, because like I was attracted to men, but anytime I got close to them, like a proximity to a guy, I'd have a panic attack. Yeah. So like male friends were always like 3 feet apart. They always knew not to hug Angel or to touch me in any way. And so, because, I still wanted romance when I was younger, and I'm like, I guess I'm gay. So I started seeking out other women at that time. And I think my first like serious high school relationship from the ages of 18 to 19 with this girl, when I kissed her, it was only like quick pecks. And it got to the, like, obviously, you know, as teenagers do, you want to have sex. And anytime, like, I was able to, like, get semi-naked, but anytime she, like, touched me or anything, I was, like, actually something happened, you know, near down there. I'd instantly have a panic attack. I'd start crying and freaking out. And I tell her, I'm like, get the fuck away from me. Get the fuck away from me. And, like, it sucked for her. She's like, whoa, what's happening, Angel? And because that happened a couple of times to her, she's like I couldn't, like, I knew what happened, but at that time I didn't I stopped telling, you know, other people, significant others, what happened in the past. And I remember telling me, she's like, look, like, I don't think this relationship can work anymore because you have something you need to work with. And like, I can't help you if you can't help yourself. So it was like one of my first heartbreaks that really should have ended up ending. And then at 19, I had to sign myself up. I was in college for like college counseling. And then eventually I found a therapist to figure out what was happening. And that's when I did, I call it the dirty work of finally processing the sexual abuse I had, and then finally processing everything else. And then after a year of that, I like officially lost my I call it my lesbian virginity at 20. And then from there, it was like hot and cold. I went from no sex at 20 to all of a sudden I wanted all the sex with all the ladies. And
anorexic type.
Yeah, I basically became an addict at that point because I was like doing extremely uncomfortable things I would have never done. But I did them anyway because not only did I felt like I had to prove myself in some way to these women that I wanted sex and I like sex. And it was bizarre because I felt like I was forcing myself to have
sex on your terms. It'd be interesting to maybe speak about that more. Like,
how can I say this? I think I forced myself to have sex even if I was extremely uncomfortable.
Okay.
It's not. And some language, it'd be like, some people would be like, oh, where was the consent? Where was, was that rape? But in my eyes, I gave them the consent, even though in my heart, I didn't want to do it. And I only did that because I had this notion that, no, you must love sex. If you want a good relationship, you need to figure this out. And at some point, I ended up enjoying sex and then like actually wanting it. But it just got to the point where I was using sex as like I equated sex with love and my worth with sex, basically. And so that's when I started getting into dangerous waters of like doing some really weird stuff in order to please my partners. And then went back to therapy for that because that's when I also saw that was a problem. And it was so wild because I was like doing a lot of things in order to try to prove. I was like basically trying to prove myself because not only was I like trying to figure out how to be happy, but I was also trying to prove to my extended family that I wasn't a high school dropout who doesn't go to college and isn't drugs. At that point in time, I was actually in a pre-med program. I was trying to become a psychologist. So I have like a couple degrees in psychology and. Excuse me. I was literally a class away from graduating with that undergrad in psychology, and then moving on to doing a master's to try to finish my pre-med. And I think when I was like 22, when I had another horrific breakup because it was like your first toxic relationship. Where I was like together with that girl for like 2 years, and then I finally had to break it off. And then I went to Europe for a month. And came back and I was like, okay, I need to figure this this weird sex thing. And I did a 180 and said, fuck being a doctor. I dropped out from that and went to art school instead. Like completely reinvented myself.
Had you linked your difficulties with sex with the abuse at that point? Talked about a lot.
I honestly, I didn't see it until I had a yeah, a friend, basically a very lovely friends with benefits. She was like, back then I was into MILFs. And she was a very lovely older woman. She was like in her early 40s. And I remember she sat me down. She said, and like we were doing something crazy. And she stopped me and she's like, "Hey, are you enjoying this?" And like no one's ever asked me that before. And I'm like, and we're like, we stopped. She's like, "I'm gonna stop because it doesn't look like you're enjoying this." And then we talked for like a good 8 hours, and I remember breaking down and telling her about my sexual abuse and then my journey so far. And she looked at me and she's like, "Oh, honey, it sounds like you're what was that she said?" She basically told me that it sounds like I was overcompensating for not having sex or for not enjoying sex. And she had something. Yeah, and she said she had something happen to you, and then all she did was that night we ended our sexual relationship, but we still stayed friends for like another year. But she basically kind of pushed me toward like you should like rediscover yourself, like go traveling. Like at that time, my dad was also telling, because he also saw me studying all the time. And I remember my dad looking at me, he's like, "Angel, do you even want to become a doctor?" And I'm like, and he's like, "Why don't you go travel? Like everyone to tell me, go travel." I'm like, "Okay, I'll go travel." And then during Europe was the time I'm like, whoa, I'm like, okay, I started seeing connections, but it wasn't like one huge epiphany. It was like little things that happened in my life that I'm like, okay, maybe I should go back and get help. And for me, because I think I had a trigger where I always felt like something was wrong with me. So my coping mechanism was get help, because I was told that my entire life, my extended family, you need to get help. So I had this thing like, I need to go get help. And what's the best to get help is therapy and reinventing my entire life. And so, I mean, at least I had that to force myself to get help. But at the age of 23, I started stabilizing. And I had this crazy idea. And I'm like, okay, I think I might be bi. And I'm like, that's when was around the time I'm like, maybe I like men. And so I went on the dating apps and I'm like, okay, I was like seeing a therapist, like, why don't you just go on a few dates with men? Like, maybe you don't know if you're attracted to men or not. I'm like, okay, I went on a couple of dates with men, it was okay. It was honestly felt like a friend thing. And then I ended up meeting this one guy on OkCupid, which is my current fiance. Wow. And I remember he was the first guy that stood out to me, because most dudes would send me like long soliloquies through chat or something. I'm like, that's weird. This dude was like, "Hey, I see you like this video game. That's cool. Hey, you want to go out?" I'm like, wow, to the point I'm blunt. I like it. Yeah. So I'm like, accept. And I went into the date. I'm like, okay, if he's nice, then I'm gonna sleep with him and see how it is. It is to sleep with a man and see, if I'm kind of digging it. And that's just how I viewed sex as the times, like something you like. For lesbians, sex, it's kind of funny. Like you have sex first, and then holding hands, and then all that other romantic stuff is later. And I know like straight dating, it's like you get to know the person, have a connection, then you can have sex. With me, it was like different. So I was following those guidelines of like have sex on the first date. And I guess I didn't realize that, like, I didn't understand straight dating at the time, so I didn't realize like a stigma to that. So when I went on a date with him, we were meeting up originally for boba tea, like a coffee date to feel each other out before like see if we want to progress a date. But the boba tea place is actually closed, and we're in a place where I like already drove 30 minutes out. He already drove 30 minutes out. He looked at me, he's like, "Hey, you want to just grab dinner?" And at the time, I was like a broke college student. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure." But in my head, I'm like, "Oh, fuck, I only have $12 in my bank account." And so we went on to the date. The date to me, I thought the date went amazing. He actually told me that he thought I didn't like him on the first initial dinner because I was quiet. But I basically told him, I was like, I was freaking out because I only had $12 in my bank account and I was trying to buy the cheapest thing at the dinner. And then from there, we got ice cream. And then date went from an hour to like 8 hours. And then I ended up sleeping with him that night. Basically, it's like I just felt so comfortable with him, and then I didn't tell him at the time that I've never had sex with a dude before. So honestly, like it was a little bad on my part, but I actually lied to him, and I was like, I told him about past relationships that I had, but instead of saying Jessica, I called her Michael. So, and told him it was like other men I've dated, and like I had so much sex with other men. I totally know what I'm doing. So like, we had sex, and then it's also funny too because that was also his birthday, which he didn't tell me. So it was his birthday sex. Yeah. And then like I felt so bad because I had a thing I had to get up early for, and like I couldn't sleep at his house. So I remember I had to wake up at like 3 a.m. and I remember like doing this, and I was like, hey, I have to leave. I'm sorry. This isn't a one-night stand. And I left. And then I like freaked out, and the day I texted him back, it's like, look, and I had to reiterate, like, I really like you. We had a fun date. This is not, I'm like, I know I left early. Next date on me if you want to do anything else. And then from there, it was like, it was, history. We, slowly started falling in love, and then eventually moving in and all that other jazz. But throughout our entire relationship, what was pivotal at our relationship was he's the first person I was able to cry in front of and also get extremely deep with, because during that time, I had the notion that I should just tell people about my sexual abuse in the first 3 dates. And I've had people in the past when I told them, it's like, I don't think this will work out. And to me, that I was okay with that because I still had problems with sex and my identity. And so when I told him, like, I remember him telling me it messed him up a little bit, but he's like, I still like you. Let's see where this goes. And then over time, he ended up having his own trauma that he had to deal with. And then I think like 6 months in the relationship, we ended up like seeking therapy together, going to like therapy workshops together, being very open. We ended up having our own journals and learning our new therapy techniques of shadow work and corrections. And basically, when everything got tough, because of course in any relationship, like things get tough, family deaths happen, financial stuff happen, a pandemic happens. We end up just holding on to each other and just like growing together with our trauma and helping each other grow. And he was the one that actually helped me understand my own trauma with the sexual abuse in my family. And within turn, I helped him with his trauma with his family. And like even to this day is like the closest person I have, and very grateful for that. Very thankful and appreciate him a lot for dealing with a lot with me and being very slow in our relationship. And I know that, like having a significant other that wants to grow with you is very lucky. I know from hearing you that you also have something similar. And like, I know not many people have that, someone in their corner to help you go work through with you, do the hard stuff, to hold you when you're crying and hear you blabbering about whatever and whenever about stuff's happening to you, and, with him, I finally realized over time that, sure, I had an attraction with women, but I was actually never sexually attracted with women because I equated sex to being with uncomfortable. Yeah. And with my fiance, I realized sex doesn't have to be uncomfortable. Sex can be loving and intimate, and there can be a connection. And over time, with each other, I healed from being extremely sexual to being a more healthy relationship with sex and how I view it. And it basically took me like like 14 years to figure that out.
It is a long journey.
An exceptionally long journey.
Yeah.
Like I tell people who are in similar instances in me, like it's never too late to help yourself and to heal from the trauma you go through. And it's not easy. It's not easy. But that shouldn't, deter you or them from seeking that help. I mean, I had times where it felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest and felt like the world was just leaning on me and everything was falling apart. But I ended up having to learn how to work through those emotions and allow myself to grieve and to process, because growing up in a conservative environment, you're just told to shut up and put it away, like put it in the box and put it away. But unfortunately for me, I had shelves and shelves worth of trauma that I just put in the box and put away. And it was like my only way of dealing with stuff like that all the way up into adulthood. And so these past 4 years, with my fiance, it was basically just like, I had to take those boxes one by one, open the lid, and let it out. Really, really process it, and then do it again, and again, and again. That's why processes like this of us overcoming trauma, it takes a little while. And it's not something that's gonna heal overnight. It's a lot of realizations. So it's many shades you have to take off in order to see, what's happening in our life, and then to even understand how you think and on why you do the things you do within your life.
It's the question, isn't it? Why?
Yeah. Why?
It's really what I found really interesting was what made me think when you were talking just now was obviously you had trauma from quite a really early age, and sort of say maybe to 15 or 18 time. If we just looked at it in that say, it would take you, one would imagine, at least that amount of time to heal on the other side of it once you kind of start healing. One would imagine.
Yeah, no, it takes a long time. And from talking to other people with different coping mechanisms, because I've also talked with recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. For me, I was like a recovering sex addict.
Yeah.
I've come to find out that people go into these things as a coping mechanism to deafen and drown out the bad feelings they feel inside because of the trauma they feel in the past. And so for me, I'm like, I got to stay away from alcohol and drugs because I don't want to be seen as a drug addict and I don't want to be seen as alcoholic. So sex was the only thing for me to abuse. And I know other friends that I've had, basically the same thing is it's the reason why I fell into it was because I was trying to run away from something. And it's hard. It doesn't make them a...
AA has the Sex Addicts Anonymous has a saying which is looking for love in all the wrong places.
Oh, 100%. That's I think it's like a short way to validation, but unfortunately it hurts your body when you do that. Any of those 3 coping mechanisms. And I know that it's easy, but I know it comes to any point in time. I think there's pivotal moments for people when they realize they have to step back and look like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore. But maybe there's a better way to live. Because for me, from what I feel now, my current state, my current emotional health, right now I feel content and happy. I remember one therapist told me that people always strive to be happy all the time, but happy is an emotion that only lasts a couple seconds, which isn't, it's just like joy and anger. What people truly should be striving for is being content. It's the feeling of peace. That's what it feels like. And right now I feel peace. I don't feel the weight that I had on my shoulders I do not feel the tightening of my chest that I always carried around. I also felt tightening in my stomach because I think I had weird anxiety in my stomach, and then the hurt from here in this area. And I'm able to sleep more because back then I was like a wound up doll. I was like just always like this all the time. I was like a stick up my ass. I was. I like to tell people that how I am now is who I wasn't back then, because back then people would have described me back then. I was a bitch. I was bitchy. I was cranky all the time, melancholy, depressing. I kind of brought the room down because I was just like always a pessimistic type of person, because that's kind of what I grew up with, just always being wound up and just also a little full of myself as well. But I like to think I'm a little bit more easygoing now.
What would you recommend to people who know they were abused but don't feel that strongly about it? So maybe they're listening to this, they say, yeah, that happened to me, but I'm not as angry about it. I've moved on from it. It's in my past. It kind of doesn't matter anymore. Is there anything you'd say to somebody like that?
Ooh, okay, so if I had a redo, but as an adult. So my situation was a little bit more dire because there's still the uncle still abusing other, little girls and chasing after other people. So there's two different routes. So if the person has been abused, but they don't feel like it's that much, to deal with, and the abuser is no longer in their life and it doesn't involve the family. To be honest, if it's not detrimental to your life and it's something you've already moved on and past, I'd say just keep it there, because it might go against some people's beliefs of saying, no, everybody has to tell the truth. But to be honest, if it's not affecting you and the abuser is out, dead, or no longer in your life, I'd say, if it was me, I'd just keep it and say, well, it's not affecting me more. I've already moved on and already have a happy life. So what's the point? And the abuser's not hurting anyone. Because I'll tell you right now, if they do tell the truth, there's going to be a second trauma that happens to people that do believe you and people that don't believe you. And to be honest, if I had the option of not saying anything and knowing my abuser is like good and gone, I wouldn't have said anything in the first place. And work through it internally myself with therapists instead of blowing up the entire family, because that's the warning you have is when you tell the truth, unfortunately, there are going to be people in your family that you thought was by your side and that you love, and they're going to say, I do not believe you. For people, unfortunately, that do have the abuser still in their lives and there's still a possibility that they can hurt other children, then I say, again, make the decision to either be ready to divorce yourself from that entire family if you do end up saying anything. But I also don't want these people to think that they're bad if they don't want to say anything, even though there is an abuser happening, because the social stigma that comes with being sexually abused is a tough weight to have. It's very hard to get over. And knowing that this will implode the family if this does happen. I do not fault. I've met other people that's had this happen, but they won't say anything in the family. And I completely understand why. I don't think they're bad people. I completely understand. But if you want true healing and, to truly feel at peace, not have your heart always like this, and to not always feel like you're on edge, then it's going to be like ripping off a Band-Aid. It's going to get extremely ugly before it becomes better. And you're going to have to hope and pray that people in your corner are going to stay in your corner. For me, that was my parents, especially my dad, who immediately cut off a family. I still love and appreciate him for doing that to this day. That's when I really realized that he was on my side Even if he didn't have hard evidence at the time, he just immediately is like no longer family to me anymore. Yeah, that's usually my recommendation. I was just tell the truth, but just be prepared for the fallout.
How do you know when the start time is, or is there like a start time to knowing now's the time to like face what you went through?
I say the start times when you realize that you have a problem. When you start realizing, like, for me, I was like, why do I keep getting into these horrifically toxic relationships? Why am I not feeling fulfilled? Like, why do I feel like I need another person to feel fulfilled in the first place in my life? The tough thing about a pandemic and being alone and having these kind of feelings, it's gonna get, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna get dark. So what I recommend is if you have a person, a friend, a sister, someone that you love, talk to them. If you can't talk to them, then maybe at least have some comfort, maybe even a pet. Yeah, being alone while going through these feelings is going to be extremely hard. So I suggest whatever comforts you in terms of favorite movies, video games, stuffed animals, maybe even a little hobby. Just make sure you take some time out of the day from relaxing to relax and try to like put it out of your mind, just even if it's just 5 minutes, and then you can come back. Because unfortunately with stuff like this, like for me, it was like 24/7 thoughts. And then like I'd be doing dishes or something, and then I'd suddenly just start sobbing because I would think about it. And I literally I ended up having at one point time, okay, I'm only cry for 20 minutes, and then afterwards I'm gonna give myself a cookie or something. Or okay, all right, it's I'm going down because I'll sit sometimes and just like on the couch, not really doing anything, and I call them thinking tornadoes, where it's like a spiral going all the way down, and you go from one negative thought to another negative thought to another negative thought, and then all of a sudden you're remembering all these horrific, memories that you don't want to remember. It's okay to take a breath and stop and say, hey, Angel, it's okay. This is happening. Let's try to take a break from this because it's getting a little too intense. Let me get up and do something else that I like. Yeah. And that's how I basically hop from one to another, because in the past, for me to like help myself, I would be like, okay, feeling sad. Let's find a new person for me to, bring all my validation in and, have sex with, and maybe I'll be happy. And like sure, in the moment, it's like, okay, but then afterwards, I still felt as empty and as horrific as afterwards. Like I didn't heal anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what other trauma reduction techniques did you use? Was it just talking therapy, like EMDR, Hoffman process, psychedelics? Very interesting to hear your take on the different techniques for trauma reduction.
I've done a lot. When I first started out, I was mostly talking therapy, and I was just trying to train myself to talk about any of the abuse and trauma that I had in my life, which was hard because there are some therapy sessions where I only talk a couple of sentences, and then the rest of the hour is just silent. So I didn't know what to say. And then my therapist at the time was very understanding. He's like, okay, take your time. It's fine. And it was like I was trying to bring the words out of my mouth, but nothing would come out. It was like I was mute. And then after that, I started doing group therapies with other sexual abuse survivors. Just hearing other people's stories gave me enough courage to tell my story. It started off small with like the memories I remembered and how I felt at the time. It kind of felt like I was learning how to write, but I first needed to teach myself the alphabet first when it came to mental health. And then from that, I did something called chair work, which is basically the therapist kind of hypnotizes you, puts you in the chair, and then you revert back to your child self when the abuse happened. And then I had my therapist basically imagine my abuser in front of me, and out loud, I would have to tell my abuser what he did, how it made me feel,
And then it felt so intense and real to me that I basically told him what he did to me, how it made me feel, and I felt like I like went back to like my little 6-year-old self. And I was like cry screaming at him like, why'd you do this to me? Like, out of everybody, like, why couldn't you just get someone your own age? And like, why would you hurt me? Like, I grew up thinking I was gonna go to hell, like stuff like that, and it was very cathartic. But therapy is like that. Is like a giant, it's like a spotlight to show you where your triggers are at, but it doesn't really like correct or heal anything. It's just like it's showing me what I had to work on. And I didn't know there's a difference in that. And then from there I did cognitive behavioral therapy, where I had a therapist try to help me see where I was, like, my feelings at the time. I was like I wasn't very emotionally mature, so I basically had to learn what boundaries were and what my feelings were. I wasn't in tune with myself. So like I had to relearn, like, am I happy? Am I sad? What am I feeling right now in this moment? Something similar when you said about, grounding yourself, like see, sight, and smell kind of stuff. And then what's really helped me would be shadow work by this guy named Brent Charlton, and he's from LA. He's worked with heroin addicts, drug addicts, and sexual abuse survivors. And he, like 3 years ago, he ended up having a workshop that he called Lionheart. And basically, this dude was like ahead of his game, where he basically gave us a framework of how to recognize your feelings, how to recognize a trigger, how to take that trigger and put it into a correction, which was like a letter to your teen or child. And then from there, from that trigger, you find whatever past from a caretaker did to you, or what trauma that happened that connects to the current trigger you're having. And then you correct it. And then from that correction, it's like a little gift wrapped up in a neat little bow that helps you process. It's like a way to process trauma that happened to you in the past, and to help you correct it in terms of maybe there's a better way to react to a trigger or to a thing that happens to you. Like, for example, for me, I get extremely upset and angry when someone called me a liar. So that would be my initial trigger. And then the thing that connects to the past would be because I was called a liar by my extended family when I tried to tell the truth about sexual abuse. So that's the feelings of where I got that from. So in order to fix my current trigger of being called a liar, I basically had to write a letter to my child self, basically telling, teen angel, saying, hey, you're not a liar. I'm so sorry this happened to you. What your caretaker said, calling you a liar, was wrong, that you didn't deserve that. And then like other little points of like how I could better emotionally handle or react that. And so next time someone calls me a liar, instead of crying and freaking out, I'd be like, oh, okay. All right, you think I'm lying? That's fine. That's fine. I know I'm telling the truth, but if you think I'm lying, that's on you. And I'm just going to go on with my life, and we'll just keep it as that, like that. It like teaches you how to react differently, or more adult and mature way. And my fiance and I have been both doing that, the shadow work, for the past 3 years. And I have a box of notebooks that's like up to here. I mean, like maybe one day I can read you a correction, but basically going through all that has really changed my perception of how I view things, how I react to things, and also just I view the world a lot differently than I did 3 years ago now, basically. And it's made me more empathetic as well to other people and their plights and what they're doing. Like when I have someone coming at me being extremely angry, instead of going, oh my God, they're so angry, I think like, oh, something bothered them today, and it might be connected to something in the past that reminds them of the thing they're angry about right now. So I'm going to emphasize with them and see why they're angry and try to figure this out, instead of me reacting and being angry back, to help me a little bit become more of a functioning adult, basically.
And you did psychedelics as well.
Oh yeah. I also did psychedelics. That was the last thing we ended up doing, because I was warned not to do psychedelics at my mental state until we were in a better mental state. And so what my fiance and I did was we ended up ordering truffles first online, which is like a derivative of mushrooms. And from what we learned is that your first trip's supposed to be a fun one, so you're not scared of it. And then the rest of the trips are like for therapy, and we've been only using psychedelics for therapy. And so first trip was fun. We were able to like block out any weird stuff, and then after that, that's when we hunkered down and really took turns taking the psychedelics in order to work their issues. And then for me, for the past couple of trips I've done with mushrooms and even with acid, I only worked on what's it called? I called them my mommy issues, but really there were woman issues due to my own mother, my grandmother, my tia, all the women in my life that I felt like either let me down in one way or made it, or my mother, she didn't let me down, but she did make my childhood a little bit more difficult growing up. And what personally worked for me was that I would take my God's dose or acid trip and I would sit in front of my paintings. I paint, and I will paint out my emotions. And then when you're in this and psychedelics, you take the psychedelics, it changes your perceptions. But it's if anybody's never done them before, basically what happens is that your thinking slows down. And then normally when you're sober, you're very quick, you're tactful, you can respond super fast. But with psychedelics, what happens is that it makes you more aware of in that millisecond when you're thinking and you're talking back to someone or like talking with someone, you think of all the memories and all the thoughts in between the lines. And that's why your perception of time kind of goes like this. And so, and it's also a great way to uncover, dark memories and new relive memories. So like when I've done one strong God's dose of mushrooms, which is around 5 to 6 grams. And that's around the territory that if you take a little too much, you'll actually, it's complete ego death and you don't know who you are. But I did it in just the cusp of the ego death. And then finally went up, and I had to use painting as a way to ground me to know where I'm at. And so when I was painting stuff, like every little brush stroke was a memory. That's like every brush stroke was an entire memory. So it was like living entire things in my childhood. So I was like living my sexual abuse and then family. And then during that time, I had like a higher being, which I think was like my normal voice. But I that time to me, that was God. God was a woman who was very beautiful and like had black hair, dark skin. And she was in the back saying, "It's okay, Angel. It's okay. Let's work through this. It's okay to cry." And like, so the trip lasted like 9 hours. So the first 5 hours, I was just sobbing while painting and sobbing and sobbing and crying and rethinking. And then each between each memory, I was able to process it. So like each trip felt like I did like 5 to 10 years worth of therapy. And so that was like the first trip. And then the second trip, I did acid, and acid is the longest. It's like a huge long trip. Like it gets to the point where like if you take enough, like everything starts turning into factorials and is very beautiful. That's why you see people on acid, they're just like staring at things because they're seeing the colors change and vibrate. And when you're painting, the colors just like do this, they shimmer and they change and they move, and it's like very beautiful. And then like it kind of looks like like you're looking through a frosted glass pane that something's moving underneath like that. And for me, when I was on acid, I did a huge painting that I did that I called Mother's Love, which like all mothers. And again, I had to work through a lot of more, like even more stuff that I need to work with women in my life. And painting it out, it was very cathartic because again, this time I cried another like 6 to 7 hours. And then when I was done, I was still painting. And it was like, I got to the point where when you're on acid, you get to a little scary part. You're like, oh, I guess this is how I'm going to see the world for the rest of my life. Cause it just keeps going and going and going. And to the point where like my eyes got tired. I'm like, man, I wish I could sleep right now, but I can't because I'm still in my acid trip. Actually, I have the painting. Let me show you.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I know you can't hear me right now, or I mean, you can't hear me.
No, we can hear you.
But this was the giant acid painting that I
ended up
doing. Yeah. So like this ended up supposed to be me when I was like a teen. And then she's like, I think it's supposed to be like the fabric of reality that I was supposed to be like trying to take reality and redo it. And then this is supposed to be like my inner child, supposed to be like more heavenly and more like outspoken and whatnot. And like all of this was funny because up here, like I know parts of the painting where up here I worked on mothers, my tia and my grandmother. So each like mushroom was like a memory that I had with them. And then down here, I worked on fathers and then also generational abuse that happens within families. And this painting was basically what I used to figure out that this is when I started fully accepting and also forgiving everyone in my life that's ever like that's hurt me in some way. And I came to the conclusion that being a parent is really hard, and people, like especially like my mother too, this was like basically an ode to my mom, that people when you're a mother, a tia, a grandmother, you're basically trying the best with what you have, even if the best isn't right. And unfortunately, like right now, like back then, I'm like, oh my, they never loved me. In their own way, they did love me. They did love me. It's just with their own untreated trauma and untreated horrific things that happened to themselves. They could only do so much to help and raise me. And I forgave. I basically got to the point where I'm like, I forgive you guys. Like, I understand. Like, I know you guys had choices, but I also understand you also had trauma. And then maybe your parents had trauma, and my great-great-grandparents had trauma. And that I realized that it's up to me right now in this moment in time to try to break away from that cycle. Hopefully, when my fiance and I start a family of our own, that I know my children will have their own traumas to deal with, but hopefully I'll be able to deal with enough where hopefully their trauma is, you know, high school crush not falling in love with them or something, you know, something normal, you know, or like a horrific breakup, you know, in college or something like that. That's like, that's the type of stuff I want them to you know, like, I don't want them to be hurt, but like, it's the type of normal stuff with trauma that I would like them to go through, not like drugs and cartel stuff and, you know, sexual abuse. Like, no, like, I just want like a happy, you know, family that's like communicative and try not to have as many secrets that's like life-changing. And I just, you know, come to a conclusion. I'm like, yeah, forgive them. Now I need to move on and try to make it better. You know, break the cycle.
Yeah. What books did you read about the subject, about trauma, about healing? Is there anything that you'd recommend?
Yes. I think the first book I've ever read was probably I Never Told Anyone. It's kind of like backwards on the screen, but it's called I Never Told Anyone, Writings of Women Survivors of Child Sexual Abuse by Ellen Bass. And in that one, I think I got this when I was 19, and it has a bunch of stories of women and their experiences and just like how they're sexually abused when they're younger, or if they were raped when they got older. And then some of them even talked about like the fallout of when they finally told their families. And it was one of the books that ended up giving me, what's it called? It gave me, it made me brave enough in order to seek therapy, basically. And then from there, like other books that I would recommend would probably be like Children of Self-Absorbed Parents. This one's good for narcissistic parents. Like my grandmother would be classified as a narcissist because of how self-absorbed she was and how she gaslight. This one just basically taught me how to identify what gaslighting is, and then how to go through with it. And then also Crucial Conversations by this guy, which is really good. Basically, the Crucial Conversations, I ended up learning how to talk to my extended family when I knew they would be exceptionally upset. So, like, if someone is a sexual abuse survivor and they want to talk to their family, I suggest first
reading the Crucial Conversations book, because it's going to teach you how to effectively communicate what you want to communicate with them instead of just devolving into an argument or a screaming match. That, and then Boundaries. A book about boundaries is one of the biggest ones. This one's like a lifesaver. It's helped me know what boundaries are, how to set them in a very healthy manner, and then know what are boundaries, and like it's okay to say no and all that other kind of stuff. I think like those 4 books, there's others as well, but most of those are just more sexual abuse books. But those are the 4 main ones that I swear by.
How often do you tell people and they tell you that happened to them or their family? I think it would be interesting to gauge how many people, just, how many people you think this happens to.
So, a therapy setting, everyone's very receptive, but I normally don't tell my story unless I know someone's trying to tell me their story, if that makes sense. Because my story, the sexual abuse and stuff, unless it isn't strictly, therapy related, or like I know they want to talk about deep stuff like that, it's kind of it's a mood killer. I'm not gonna lie. Like I've told the story before in a party setting when I probably shouldn't have, because we're all drunk, and they just like effectively killed the mood. And then at the time, to me, and I'm like, this is a funny thing that happened to me, but I think it was like another way of me to process trauma. But it just made everyone uncomfortable, and I'm like, oh, I should probably stop oversharing. But in terms of like how common it is, I know in the Hispanic community, it's pretty common. It's more common than you like. But for like other ethnicities out there, I don't know. It depends on social economic status, and then the family itself, and where they were born, where they're raised, like it. And unfortunately, it's also something it's one of the number one kept secrets, like right next to murder, of someone murdering someone in the family. It's just something that they bury away. And I don't talk on stuff again, like I said again, unless like a topic comes up. And then usually when I talk about my story, then they feel brave enough to talk about their story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes total sense. Okay.
This is Angel from San Diego, and thank you for listening to my story. I hope hearing what I have to say and hearing what Rahul has to say helps you in any way or form. There's no judgment here. There's everyone here, at least in this channel, is understanding. And if you're in a similar situation, then I hope everything works out for you and that you heal from it.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed listening to Angel's story. If you'd like to support this channel, you can donate to our PayPal, which is on your screen now. The link is also in the description. We hope to see you back here soon.